On October 12, 1983, at around 6:47 a.m., a woman identified as Anna Harper bid her two children farewell, informed her husband of an early work meeting, and departed their suburban Virginia residence. She was carrying only her purse and a single briefcase. Her return never occurred. Her vehicle was discovered 3 days later in long-term parking at Dallas International Airport, with the keys still in the ignition. By the time federal investigators reconstructed the events, Anna Harper, the PTA volunteer, the devoted mother, the dependable defense contractor employee, was already thousands of miles away, seated in a Moscow debriefing room, sipping tea and responding in perfect Russian. This was because Anna Harper was not who she claimed to be. She never had been. This is the account of how a Soviet intelligence operative maintained a clandestine existence for nearly a decade within the heart of American suburbia. It details how she transmitted classified information to the KGB, while simultaneously baking cookies for school fundraisers and observing Little League games. It also describes the choice she made when the net began to tighten, a decision that would forever burden her family. The narrative explores deception, ideology, and the cold, calculated nature of espionage during one of the most volatile eras in modern history. Its genesis lies not in Virginia, but within a training facility near Leningrad in the early 1970s, where a young woman was being prepared for a mission that would shape her entire life. According to declassified KGB records released decades later, her true name was Yolina Makyovna Sukalova, born in Minsk in 1947 to parents with impeccable party affiliations. Her father held a mid-level administrative position in the Ministry of Agriculture. Her mother was a school teacher, and Yolina herself was identified early on as a promising candidate for intelligence work. She possessed intelligence, adaptability, and crucially, an almost preternatural capacity for assimilation. Former instructors described her as unremarkable in the most advantageous sense, someone easily overlooked in a crowd, whose facial features seemed to adapt to the context, and whose personality could shift to suit any required role. She spoke English with only the slightest hint of an accent, having diligently studied the language since adolescence. By the time she completed her training program in 1973, she had been fundamentally transformed. She had adopted a new name, a fabricated personal history, and a specific mission. The strategy was, on paper at least, straightforward. Elena was to enter the United States under a discrete identity, one unlikely to attract immigration scrutiny. A name with a Polish sound, consistent with her fabricated background as a graduate student from Eastern Europe, was chosen. She became Anna Kowalik, complete with a Polish passport, academic records from the University of Warsaw, and a meticulously crafted narrative of fleeing the communist bloc in pursuit of opportunities in the West. This was a plausible cover story. Poland had a history of citizens immigrating to America, and her stated reason for seeking study in the United States appeared entirely logical to immigration officials. Direct acquisition of nuclear secrets or classified documents was not an immediate objective. The KGB operated on a more patient, long-term strategy, planting operatives who might yield valuable intelligence over the course of their careers, rather than through single, high-risk operations. In 1974, Yolina, now Anna Kowalik, arrived in New York City with a student visa and a suitcase filled with carefully chosen American attire. She was one of many similar agents being subtly integrated into Western societies, forming part of a vast, covert network spanning continents during the Cold War. Her initial year in the United States was spent precisely as her cover story dictated, attending graduate courses in electrical engineering at a mid-tier university in New Jersey, forging friendships, socializing, and absorbing the nuances of American life. Her romantic relationships were casual, and she worked part-time at the campus library, supplementing the modest financial support received through discreetly managed channels. To those who knew her, she was simply Anna Kowalik, a foreign student striving in America. Her demeanor was polite but reserved, diligent yet not overly intense, the kind of person who naturally blended into any group. This anonymity was precisely the intention. In 1975, she met David Harper at a community event in Princeton. David, then 32, was an engineer himself, recently divorced and somewhat socially reserved. He was employed by a mid-sized defense contractor serving the Department of Defense, primarily involved with routine components like circuit boards and communication systems. While not groundbreaking, His work involved information not publicly available. Their courtship began that autumn, and by all accounts, David's feelings were genuine. He was captivated by her. Friends from that period later recalled him describing her as intelligent, kind, and refreshingly down-to-earth. Anna's true sentiments remain unknown, but she performed her role convincingly. They were married in April 1976 in a small ceremony attended by a few of David's relatives and a handful of Anna's acquaintances from university. She cited difficulties with travel visas for her family in Poland as the reason for their absence, a detail David accepted without question, as he had no cause for suspicion. Upon marrying David, Anna Kowalik transitioned into Anna Harper, adopting this fully Americanized name for the subsequent 7 years. The marriage served critical operational functions. It provided a more profound and enduring cover, considerably more difficult to penetrate should an investigation arise. The evolution from Anna Kowalik, a Polish immigrant student, to Anna Harper, an American wife and mother, conferred layers of legitimacy that rendered her virtually invisible to counterintelligence efforts. Furthermore, it granted her proximity, if not direct access, to an individual employed in the defense industry, potentially yielding information shared casually or inadvertently left accessible at home. More significantly, it bestowed a level of legitimacy that a single foreign woman living alone could not achieve in 1970s America. Married women with families were not suspected of being foreign intelligence agents. They were presumed to be precisely what they appeared to be. By 1977, Anna and David had relocated to a tranquil suburban neighborhood in McLean, Virginia, near Washington, D.C. Anna had given birth to their first child, a daughter named Emily, followed by a son, Michael, in early 1979. During this period, Anna secured employment as a technical analyst at the same defense contractor where her husband worked, a company named Advanced Systems Technologies, which held contracts with the Army and Navy for communications equipment. She had applied in late 1976, and her background check, which included a review of her Polish immigration records and academic credentials, came back clear. The identity meticulously crafted by the KGB as Anna Kowalik was sufficiently robust to pass the standard scrutiny of the time. By mid-1977, Anna Harper possessed a security clearance and access to classified information, not top secret, but still valuable to a foreign intelligence service. This marked a shift in the operation from strategic positioning to active intelligence gathering. Anna's responsibilities at Advanced Systems Technologies involved reviewing technical specifications and facilitating communication between engineering teams and government liaisons. This afforded her consistent exposure to documents concerning military contracts, project schedules, equipment capabilities, and budgetary details. Much of this material was routine and would hold little significance for an average individual. However, to an intelligence analyst in Moscow, even seemingly mundane details could be valuable, revealing patterns, strategic priorities, supply chain vulnerabilities, and technological deficiencies. Consequently, Anna commenced the deliberate and systematic process of relaying information to her handlers. The methods employed were intentionally low-tech and unhurried. She avoided photographing documents or using microfilm, as the risk of immediate detection was too high. Instead, she committed details to memory, drafted summaries in coded language, and conveyed them during brief, carefully orchestrated encounters with a contact operating under diplomatic cover at the Soviet embassy in Washington. These clandestine meetings, known in intelligence circles as brush passes, occurred in public spaces such as parks, shopping centers, or museum lobbies, locations where two individuals could briefly interact without attracting attention. Occasionally, she would deposit materials at a dead drop, a prearranged concealed location for retrieval by her contact. Examples included a loose brick in a garden wall, or a hollowed-out tree stump in Rock Creek Park, sites meticulously scouted and vetted prior to their use. For years, this system proved effective. Anna provided information consistently, though not incessantly. A report here, a set of specifications there. The KGB received what they considered a steady flow of pertinent intelligence. The intelligence wasn't revolutionary, not something that would alter the trajectory of the Cold War, but it was of good quality, dependable, and originated from an individual who had previously demonstrated herself to be both diligent and prudent. Back in Virginia, Anna's existence proceeded along its anticipated suburban course. She attended parent-teacher meetings, organized birthday celebrations, and volunteered at the local elementary school's library. She and David had a established routine. He dedicated long hours to his work, while she managed the household and her own professional responsibilities. Weekends were spent engaging in typical family activities, excursions to the zoo, dining at casual restaurants, and undertaking home renovation projects. By all outward indications, they were living the quintessential American dream. However, beneath the surface, the pressure was immense. Maintaining a dual existence isn't akin to switching between two distinct personas. It represents a continuous act of performance, a perpetual mental and emotional balancing act. Every discussion, every interaction, every innocuous inquiry from a neighbor or colleague necessitated scrutiny through the framework of her fabricated identity, assessing potential risks, and responding in a manner consistent with Anna Harper's manufactured backstory. Compounding this was the reality of her clandestine activities, which involved a profound betrayal of trust for everyone in her life, including her husband and children. Whether she experienced guilt is not explicitly stated. Former Soviet intelligence officers, who have publicly discussed comparable operations, often describe a mindset where ideology and duty take precedence over personal sentiments. Nevertheless, it's difficult to conceive that there weren't moments, late at night or in the early morning, when the sheer magnitude of her situation became an almost unbearable burden. By the early 1980s, the intelligence landscape was in flux. The Cold War, which had maintained a relatively stable, albeit tense, equilibrium for much of the preceding decade, was entering a more assertive phase. The Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 had escalated tensions, and Ronald Reagan's election in 1980 ushered in a new, more confrontational approach to American foreign policy. Simultaneously, American counterintelligence agencies were becoming more sophisticated, increasingly suspicious, and more focused on identifying and neutralizing Soviet operatives who had infiltrated American institutions. The FBI's counterintelligence division was expanding. New technologies were being implemented for monitoring communications and tracking suspicious activities, and a growing understanding within the intelligence community suggested that the Soviets had likely established long-term sleeper agents within various governmental and industrial sectors. Anna, who had been actively engaged in her operations for nearly a decade by this point, was still regarded as a valuable operative by her superiors. However, the KGB was also cognizant that the prolonged presence of an operative in a given position amplified the risk of discovery. Her temporal advantage was diminishing, and the demands placed upon her were escalating. In 1982, she received instructions to acquire more in-depth information regarding a specific project undertaken by Advanced Systems Technologies. This project involved the development of a communications encryption system intended for use by NATO forces stationed in Europe. This directive represented a significant escalation from the routine reports she had previously been submitting. It was a priority target, something Moscow desired with enough urgency to warrant increased risks. Consequently, Anna embraced those risks. She began staying late at her office, volunteering for supplementary assignments that afforded her access to the pertinent files. She surreptitiously duplicated documents whenever opportunities arose without detection, utilizing a miniature camera provided by her handler, equipment that appears rudimentary by today's standards but was considered state-of-the-art tradecraft at the time. She transmitted these materials through her established channels, and for several months, the operation seemed to be progressing successfully. However, in the spring of 1983, something faltered. The precise nature of this error has never been definitively confirmed, but according to information that surfaced years later, it involved a document that Anna had photocopied and subsequently failed to return to its designated location. It was a minor oversight, the kind of mistake that might have gone unnoticed under different circumstances. But in this instance, it was detected. A security officer conducting a routine inventory of classified materials identified the discrepancy, initiating a more thorough review that subsequently led to inquiries about who had accessed the file and when. Anna's name surfaced during this review, initially not as a primary suspect, but as an individual who had been present in the vicinity during the relevant time frame. This marked the beginning of the end, although Anna was not immediately aware of it. The FBI, having been alerted to the potential security breach, commenced a discreet, systematic investigation. They reviewed access logs, interviewed personnel, and began reconstructing a timeline of individuals' movements. Anna's name continued to appear peripherally in this investigation, never quite at the forefront, but consistently present, exhibiting subtle anomalies that were difficult to articulate, but impossible to disregard. Then, one of the investigators, a seasoned counterintelligence agent named Richard Callahan, who had dedicated his entire career to pursuing Soviet spies, observed something peculiar in Anna Harper's background. It was not a dramatic revelation, but rather a minor inconsistency in her employment history, a gap of a few months in 1974 that did not perfectly align with her declarations on her security clearance applications. Callahan retrieved her file and initiated a deeper examination, cross-referencing her records with other databases and contacting counterparts in different agencies. The more he investigated, the more these discrepancies accumulated. Her Polish passport and immigration records, upon closer inspection, exhibited irregularities suggestive of sophisticated forgeries. Verifying her academic records from the University of Warsaw through standard channels proved challenging. Furthermore, when Callahan attempted to locate individuals who might have known her during her time in Poland, prior to her arrival in America, his efforts yielded no results. It was as if Anka Kowalik had simply appeared in 1974, fully formed, with no discernible preceding history. By the summer of 1983, the FBI had initiated a full-scale counterintelligence investigation into Anna Harper. While they lacked definitive proof of her being a Soviet agent, they possessed sufficient circumstantial evidence to justify surveillance. Her phone calls were intercepted, her movements were tracked, and agents discreetly interviewed individuals in her social circle, posing broad questions about her behavior, habits, and background. David Harper was not informed of this investigation, at least not initially, as the FBI sought to avoid alerting Anna, and also harbored uncertainty regarding David's potential complicity. From their perspective, everyone within Anna's sphere of influence was considered a potential suspect until proven otherwise. For several months, the surveillance yielded no conclusive findings. Anna, if she was indeed a spy, was exercising extreme caution. She attended work, returned home, tended to her children, participated in school events, and provided no visible indication of being aware of the surveillance. However, in September 1983, a development occurred. One of the FBI surveillance teams observed Anna making an unscheduled trip to Washington, D.C. on a Saturday afternoon, having informed her husband that she needed to run errands. She drove to a shopping center in Georgetown, parked her car, and spent approximately 40 minutes browsing in various stores. During this period, she briefly encountered a man later identified as a known Soviet intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover. The interaction lasted less than 10 seconds, just long enough for them to pass within a few feet of each other. To the surveillance team, it appeared to be a brush pass, a moment where materials or information could have been exchanged covertly. This was the evidence the FBI had been awaiting. It was insufficient for an arrest, not yet, but enough to validate their suspicions. The investigation immediately intensified. Additional resources were allocated, more agents were assigned, and the surveillance became more stringent and comprehensive. The strategy was to monitor Anna until she re-established contact with her handler, amass enough evidence to construct an irrefutable case, and then apprehend her in a manner that would facilitate the dismantling of her entire network. However, they underestimated the vigilance of Anna's own handlers and the swiftness with which the KGB could respond when sensing one of their operatives was in peril. In early October 1983, Anna received a signal from her handler, an urgent message conveyed through a prearranged method, indicating the necessity for her immediate departure from the country. The specifics of how this signal was transmitted remain undisclosed, but the most probable explanation involves a coded message within a newspaper advertisement or a brief telephone call employing a pre-established code phrase. Regardless of the method, the message was unambiguous. Her cover had been compromised, the Americans were closing in, and she needed to extract herself before it was too late. Consequently, on the morning of October 12th, Anna Harper made a decision that would shape the remainder of her life and the lives of all those she left behind. She awoke early, prepared her children for school, made breakfast for David, and behaved as though it were an ordinary day. She informed David she had an early meeting at work, a common occurrence. She bid Emily and Michael goodbye, also a routine gesture. Then she departed, carrying her purse and a briefcase. Inside that briefcase, according to investigators' subsequent reconstructions, were approximately $15,000 in cash, a set of counterfeit identity documents provided by the KGB years earlier for precisely such an emergency scenario, and likely little else. She relinquished her wedding band, cherished family photographs, personal effects, essentially severing all ties to the life she had painstakingly constructed over the preceding 9 years. Arriving at Dallas International Airport in her car, she deposited it in a long-term parking zone, abandoning it with the keys still in the ignition. From there, it's presumed she utilized a taxi or shuttle service to reach a different location, where she changed her attire and employed her fabricated documentation to navigate a sequence of flights that would ultimately transport her beyond national borders. The precise itinerary she followed has never been definitively established. However, intelligence analysts posit that her initial destination was Mexico City, followed by Havana, and subsequently Moscow. The entirety of this journey would have spanned less than 48 hours. By the time the FBI apprehended her absence, she was already beyond their jurisdiction, residing in a secure location within the Soviet Union. There, she underwent debriefing by KGB officials, eager to extract all knowledge acquired during her tenure in America. Returning to Virginia, David Harper arrived home from work on October 12th to discover his wife was missing. Initially, he conjectured she was delayed or had ventured out post-work without informing him. It was only as evening progressed into night and she had still not returned or made contact that his concern began to mount. He attempted to contact her workplace, but no one reported seeing her. He called friends, but none had any knowledge of her whereabouts. By the following morning, he had officially reported her missing to the authorities. It was at this juncture that the FBI intervened, informing him that his wife was not who he believed her to be, and that her return was highly improbable. This revelation proved devastating, not only to David, but to everyone acquainted with Anna Harper. Her colleagues were astounded. Her neighbors expressed disbelief, and her children, Emily and Michael, aged 6 and 4 respectively at the time of their mother's disappearance, were left with unanswered questions that would persist indefinitely. David Harper, for his part, fully cooperated with the FBI's inquiry, submitting to numerous interviews, granting agents access to his residence, and providing his financial records and personal documents. The FBI ultimately concluded that David had been an unwitting participant, a man who had genuinely believed he was married to Anna Kowalczyk, who later became Anna Harper, and was entirely unaware that his wife was a Soviet operative. Nevertheless, this conclusion did little to alleviate the pain and humiliation of such profound deception. In the ensuing years, David Harper largely withdrew from public life, relocating to another state with his children and endeavoring to reconstruct a life shattered by betrayal. The FBI's investigation into Anna Harper, or Yelena Sokova, persisted for years following her vanishing, yet it yielded minimal additional intelligence. The Soviet liaison she had been collaborating with was expelled from the United States as part of a broader diplomatic reprisal, only to be promptly succeeded by another individual, and the network she belonged to remained largely intact. The classified information she had procured was assessed for potential damage, and while it was determined that some of her reports had provided value to the Soviets, none were deemed critically detrimental. She functioned as a capable operative, though not an exceptional one, and the intelligence she furnished, while useful, did not fundamentally alter the geopolitical equilibrium of the Cold War. As for Yelena herself, she vanished into the Soviet apparatus and was never publicly heard from again. Unverified accounts suggest she was granted a new identity, possibly a new assignment, and continued her service with Soviet intelligence in some undisclosed capacity, but nothing has been substantiated. Certain former intelligence officers who defected from the Soviet Union in later years claim to have encountered mentions of her, describing her as a cautionary example utilized in KGB training programs. She was presented as an operative who had successfully maintained her cover for nearly a decade, only to be ultimately compelled to abandon everything due to a singular error. Whether she ever contemplated the family she left behind, or if she experienced remorse, guilt, or any discernible emotion, remains unknown. The sole certainty is that she never initiated contact with David, Emily, or Michael, not even once. The case of Anna Harper, or Yelena Solovivera, while not unique in the annals of Cold War espionage, serves as an emblem of a specific type of operation at which the Soviet Union excelled, the long-term, deep-cover agent. These individuals could embed themselves within American society, establish identities, forge relationships, and patiently gather intelligence over spans of years, or even decades. Such operatives were not ostentatious. They were not the cinematic figures like James Bond, extracting nuclear codes and evading capture in high-performance vehicles. Instead, they were characterized by patience, methodical execution, and a willingness to invest considerable time and effort for incremental gains. The psychological burden of this work was immense, necessitating not only deception, but sustained, comprehensive deception, to the extent that an entire life became a performance. What lends this narrative a particularly haunting quality is not the espionage itself, but its human toll. David Harper was confronted with the reality that the woman he loved, the mother of his children, had never truly existed, or at least the persona he knew was an elaborately constructed fabrication. Emily and Michael Harper grew up without their mother, burdened by the knowledge that she had opted to abandon them rather than confront the repercussions of her actions. And Yelena Sokolova, wherever she ultimately resided, had to live with the fact that she had left behind two children who would grow up asking questions she would never answer. The broader ramifications of the case were also significant. Anna Harper's escape exposed critical deficiencies in American security clearance protocols and background investigation procedures, weaknesses that the FBI and other agencies urgently sought to rectify in the wake of her disappearance. It also amplified the pervasive suspicion that permeated counterintelligence efforts during the Cold War, fostering the understanding that Soviet operatives could be omnipresent, integrated into any institution, living seemingly ordinary lives while actively working against American interests. This suspicion was not entirely unfounded, as subsequent revelations concerning other Soviet agents operating within the United States during that period would later affirm. However, it also contributed to an atmosphere of apprehension and distrust that impacted numerous innocent individuals who found themselves under scrutiny simply due to their perceived profile or unconventional background. In the years since the cessation of the Cold War, some particulars regarding Yelena Sokova's operation have surfaced through declassified documents and interviews with former intelligence personnel. Yet, a substantial portion of her story remains enshrouded in secrecy. The archives of the KGB, to the extent they remain extant and accessible, may contain information that has never been publicly disclosed. It is probable that the complete truth regarding her mission, her motivations, and her ultimate fate will never be ascertained. What is known, however, is that she was a participant in a vast, clandestine conflict that unfolded not only on the global stage, but also within suburban residences, corporate offices, and elementary school parking lots. A conflict where the stakes were measured not merely in geopolitical terms, but in the devastated lives of those caught in the crossfire. The enduring question, a query that has never been satisfactorily answered, is what Yelena Sokolova believed she was fighting for. Was she a fervent adherent to communist ideology, genuinely convinced that the Soviet Union represented a superior future for humanity, and that her work, however morally compromised, served that vision? Or was she merely a product of a system that recognized her utility and molded her into an instrument, an operative who followed directives as trained, without excessive contemplation of the consequences? The reality likely lies somewhere between these extremes, a confluence of ideology, duty, and the profound compartmentalization that enables individuals to commit reprehensible acts while still regarding themselves as fundamentally good. What is undeniable is that she made a choice, and that choice generated consequences that radiated outward in ways she could not have fully foreseen. David Harper underwent years of therapy, attempting to process his experience and reconstruct his sense of trust and identity after such profound deception. Emily Harper, possessing sufficient age for some memories of her mother, grew up grappling with a complex blend of anger and bewilderment, perpetually struggling to reconcile the woman she recalled, the one who read her bedtime stories and braided her hair, with the individual who had abandoned her without hesitation. Michael Harper, too young to retain significant recollections, grew up with an intrinsic void, an absence in his life where a mother should have been, coupled with the awareness that she had deliberately chosen to leave him behind. Ultimately, Yelena Sokova's narrative is a testament to the cost of deception, exploring what transpires when ideology and obligation intersect with human relationships, and how the Cold War, despite its intricate geopolitical dimensions, devolved into individual choices made by individuals. Some of these choices were heroic, some tragic, and some simply incomprehensible. This is a story devoid of a neat resolution or a clear moral, as the reality of espionage, particularly during that era, was a messy, morally ambiguous landscape. The individuals involved were seldom purely virtuous or entirely malevolent. They were simply people caught within circumstances exceeding their control, striving to navigate impossible situations with incomplete information and conflicting allegiances. Anna Harper departed from her home on a Friday morning in October 1983 and never returned. And the ramifications of that choice continue to resonate decades later, impacting the individuals she abandoned. It echoes within the records of intelligence services, still striving to comprehend her actions and motivations. And it reverberates through the history of a war that shaped a whole generation. She transformed into an apparition, an enigma, a somber warning, and whatever existence she forged for herself following that fateful morning was one lived with the certainty that she had betrayed every person who had ever placed their trust in her, and that there was no return, never. The investigation technically remains open, though the emergence of any novel details at this juncture is improbable. David Harper passed away in 2019, never having remarried and dedicating the concluding period of his life to becoming a man of subdued resentment, seldom discussing his history. Emily and Michael Harper, now in their late 40s, have consistently refused interview requests throughout the years, opting instead to let the past remain undisturbed. And Yelena Sokolova, assuming she is still living, would now be in her late 70s, residing somewhere within the former Soviet Union under an unknown alias. She would carry with her the recollection of a former life and the family she once possessed, and the comprehension that none of it was genuinely real, or at least not as it ought to have been. This is the narrative of the woman who disappeared, the lives she relinquished, and the enigmas that will remain perpetually unresolved.